This is the most futuristic Nike sneaker ever. It's the brand new Nike Air Max 1000, and the reason this shoe is so futuristic is because it's fully 3D printed. 3D printed shoes are the latest trend in sneakers, and they're actually not new. About 10 years ago, Adidas released the Futurecraft 4D, and while at the time it was still not even the first 3D printed shoe to hit the market, it was the most popular. Now I should preface this video by saying I'm a huge sneakerhead. In fact, I love sneakers so much, my main channel on YouTube is a sneaker channel called Seth Fowler. Check it out through the link in the description below. But I love 3D printing, I love shoes, so 3D printed shoes are right up my alley. So when the Futurecraft 4D first released, I was incredibly excited to check that shoe out. Essentially, what the Futurecraft 4D was a half 3D printed, half Adidas sneaker. So the top half of the shoe was a standard Adidas upper. The bottom half of the shoe was printed by Carbon, a 3D printing company. And it looked a lot like this. In fact, this is one of Adidas's newer silhouettes that just released a couple months ago, the 4D Forward 4. Now, realistically, at the time, that shoe could be considered a gimmick or a proof of concept, proving that a big brand like Adidas could 3D print a pair of shoes or work with a 3D printing company and sell them to a mass market, and they'd sell well. In fact, that first shoe sold out immediately, probably because it was in very limited numbers, and resold for thousands of dollars. In fact, the pair that I bought for $800 back in the day. Sounds crazy probably to you guys, but as a sneakerhead, that's not even the most that I've spent on sneakers. Just check out my channel. I've spent a lot on sneakers. But that was sort of the genesis of popular 3D printed shoes in the market. Nowadays, we still have sort of half 3D printed shoes that are made up of standard uppers with 3D printed midsoles, but we also have fully 3D printed pairs of shoes from brands like Nike. And what's crazy is that over the last 10 years, 3D printing has exploded in footwear. In fact, these are all shoes that are on the floor right now, but are available right now to purchase from their respective brands. So 3D printed footwear is not so much even an outlier anymore, it's becoming a genuine category of shoes. This is actually a collaboration with Puma. It's called the Asap Rocky Mostro. It's fully 3D printed, it's resin printed, and it looks ridiculous. I'll be honest with you, but some people can pull this off. I'm just not one of those people. This is a fully 3D printed pair of Way of Wade's, which is Dwayne Wade's brand that he has with Li Ning. And it looks like a rock, but it is actually fully 3D printed and then painted. These are two of Adidas's newer silhouettes. They're also resin printed, and this one is fully 3D printed. This one has a tongue with laces, so it's not fully 3D printed, but it's close. Here's another example of fully 3D printed slide from Asics. Of course, we've got the Nike Air Max 1000, and this is the Apthcry Mule, a pair of shoes that I'm actually releasing myself. Apthcry is my brand, and we manufactured it the same place that Nike manufactured the Air Max 1000. These are just a few limited examples. There are tons of 3D printed shoes in the market. And you might be saying to yourself, well, that's fine. 3D printed shoes are out there, but why would you buy a 3D printed shoe over a regular sneaker? And there's actually a lot of good reasons why, and the future of 3D printed footwear is looking incredible. 3D printing is an additive process. Essentially what it is layering a material on top of each other until you create a 3D shape. 3D printed footwear is made really in two different ways. There are two different categories. You've got resin printed shoes like this, the Puma Mostros, and then you've got FDM printed shoes like this, the Nike Air Max 1000. Now to understand why there are two different versions, I should explain some of the pros and cons. Resin printed shoes, like all the shoes that Adidas has made with Carbon, the Puma Mostro, or even the Asics Slide, is actually the most common kind of printing when it comes to footwear. And the reason for that is because the resolution on these shoes, or I guess the detail that you can get with resin printing, is higher than with FDM printing. Now like I mentioned, 3D printing is done in layers, whether you're doing it with a plastic that you heat up and shoot through a hot end, which is FDM printing, or in the case of resin printing, you've got a basin of resin that has some sort of like UV light emitter or a flash or something that creates an image, hardens that layer of resin, and then of course you do that over and over and over again until you create a 3D image. Now because in the case of resin printing, you're hardening a liquid, you get these incredibly thin, almost film-like layers, meaning that the detail that you can create on a shoe is incredible. I mean, the Puma Mostro is a great example of that. This shoe has spikes all over it, which would be pretty difficult to get in this sort of level of detail and quality on an FDM printer. Same thing with the Adidas Climacools. This shoe is incredibly detailed. It's got this lattice texture all the way through, and it's something that, while sure you probably could do it in FDM printing, the level of detail that you can get and the smoothness of the shoe may not be there. Resin printing is sort of the ideal way to go when it comes to detail work. Like, for example, my friend makes Warhammer game pieces. He uses a resin printer because it looks like they were almost molded, like they were actually made in a factory. Now, there are problems with resin printers, and the problem is that they can be somewhat toxic. In fact, when you actually print in resin, you don't want to touch the resin with your skin, you have to wear gloves, and you don't want to breathe in the fumes from the resin because that can cause a lot of problems. Not only that, resin is messy, and it hardens in UV light. And there have been times where I've gone to dump it, because you have to dispose of it in a very specific way, where I walk past a window and the UV light just hardens it, and it ruins the entire vat of resin. It's not like instant, but you leave it in light long enough, it's gonna harden, and it's pretty quick. So it's a messy process, it's a somewhat toxic process. Not only that, every time you wear a resin shoe outside, it does very lightly harden each time, meaning that eventually one day, if you wore it for probably a very long time, it might be a hard shoe. I mean, you can look at these resin shoes now, they're very soft, they're very flexible, they're very easy to manipulate. But the more that you wear them outside, specifically UV-based resins, this might not be a UV-based resin, I'm not actually sure about this one, but they'll harden. So pros of resin printing: detail, incredible, looks amazing, but somewhat toxic, hardens possibly every time that you wear it, very messy, and it does take a little bit longer to print than FDM printing. But now let's talk about FDM printing. Now, FDM printing is actually a technique that's not used that often in footwear. However, I think that's gonna change. So this is a Nike Air Max 1000. This shoe first released at the end of last year at this event called ComplexCon, and it's a collaboration, or a collaborative effort, I should say, between Nike and this German 3D printing company called Zellerfeld. So Zellerfeld is a company that was founded a couple years ago, and their goal is to put a 3D printed shoe on every foot, which I think is very lofty, but I think it's a good idea. The reason being that 3D printed footwear has a lot of really great applications. For example, people with 2 different size feet. Scan your feet, print a shoe that exactly fits your foot. Or maybe you have high arches, you need more arch support. Scan your feet, print a shoe with more arch support. The future applications are incredible, and if they can do that on a mass scale, it could change the footwear industry completely. I mean, you see it done in clothing right now. If you can literally have a shoe printed to your exact foot, I mean, it'll fit like a glove. So unlike all of the other brands we talked about, Carbon, which works with Adidas, Lux Creo, which is I didn't mention yet, but they work with Asics, and some other brands that print resin shoes, Zellerfeld prints FDM shoes. And there's a few reasons for that. The first is that it's not toxic. The second is that this material is actually recyclable. Once you're done with your Zellerfeld shoe, you can send it back to Zellerfeld, they'll grind it back up and turn it into a new pair of shoes, which is actually a huge thing, and I don't think people talk about that enough. The fact that these shoes are recyclable is incredible. And sure, even though it's FDM printed and you can see the layer lines, the resolution is still incredible. Like, from a distance, it looks smooth. They're faster to print, and the biggest one, they're much more comfortable. FDM printed shoes, at least the TPU, or the thermoplastic polyurethane that Zellerfeld prints with, is incredibly soft and flexible. I really should show you this pair because it's a bit softer than the Nike one. This is, again, my shoe that I'm releasing with Zellerfeld on August 29th. Stay tuned for info on that. I mean, look at how soft this is. It's unbelievable that it's a plastic but feels like a foam. It's nuts. And when you compare it to something like the Adidas Climacools, while sure this is still soft, it's not the softest thing in the world. It also kind of smells too. Resin printed shoes smell. FDM shoes don't really smell. And there's still a crazy level of detail that you can achieve with FDM printed shoes. And what I love about Zellerfeld shoes in particular, and I'm not just saying that because we're making a Zellerfeld shoe, but I'm also saying that because they have their own print patterns or infill percentages that make this shoe feel like different materials, even though it's all printed out of TPU. So for example, the toe of this sneaker, this flat area, kind of feels like a, if you have any experience with Yeezy slides or any kind of foam slide, it kind of feels like that. Whereas if you move up to this checkerboard pattern, it feels much more like the foam that you find inside of a very well padded tongue. Then when you move down on the sneaker, you get to the midsole, which feels kind of like a standard EVA midsole. Or for people who don't know much about midsoles, it's like a standard foam. And it's still very soft because you've got more of that checkerboard pattern in there, which feels like another foam. So this shoe has all these different textures and feels, but it's all made out of the same thermoplastic polyurethane, which is pretty incredible. Now you still can achieve that with resin. In a lot of cases, it won't be as soft, but as you can see, the upper of the shoe is a bit softer versus the midsole, which is a bit stiffer, and that's just because there's more material in the bottom of the shoe. Probably a similar idea here. There's probably a thicker infill in the bottom of the shoe, but in my opinion, the FDM shoes from Zellerfeld specifically, I haven't tried a lot of other FDM shoes because there aren't a lot of other FDM shoes, feel really, really good on foot and feel like more standard materials in a way that I never thought you could have on a 3D printed shoe. Now, while I totally understand the appeal of resin printed shoes, and I like resin printed shoes, I actually don't have a problem with them, I think the kind of printing that has a higher chance of success in creating the most common 3D printed shoes or 3D printed shoes that you see everywhere, I think it's FDM shoes. And I think Zellerfeld is doing the best version of that currently. Now, of course, big brands like Adidas have been working with larger 3D printing companies like Carbon, which I believe is US based, but there are Chinese manufacturers that also 3D print that also can create resin printed shoes that are probably cheaper and probably feel just as good. But the reason I like Zellerfeld so much though is because these shoes feel so much softer than any other 3D printed shoe that I've ever tried. I mean, I've 3D printed shoes at my own house. If you watch my secret channel, you've seen me do this. I had this phase where I 3D printed shoes for like 2 years and I was obsessed with it. I even collabed with Braille with the 3D printed skateboarding shoe. These feel terrible, but these were printed on my home printer, my Creality, which is never gonna feel as good as this. Also FDM though. Just saying. Zellerfeld has come up with this proprietary TPU blend and their own proprietary printers, which I'm sure Carbon has proprietary printers too. But they've created what I think is the best version of a 3D printed shoe. Not only that, when you buy a shoe from Zellerfeld, you scan your foot to make sure that it's the exact right size for you. Now, currently the scanning process is not the best in that you take a picture of your foot next to a piece of paper and it's really only for the sizing of the shoe. But eventually, whenever I'm assuming they develop an app or something happens where they can actually get a 3D scan of your foot, which I understand some people maybe don't want to give that up, but if you want to custom printed shoes, you're gonna have to. I think they'll be able to create much crazier pairs of shoes that fit your foot exactly. Currently, the scanning really is just for sizing, but I do think the potential is there for the future of fully glove-like fitting shoes or shoes that maybe have more support if you need more support. Any shoe that you buy on Zellerfeld, except for the Nike ones, you can foot scan, like the shoe that we've got coming out. So in that case, if you're someone who maybe has 2 different size feet, which is actually very common, or maybe someone who, you know, you're in between a 9 and a 9.5 or something like that, you'll be able to get a shoe that fits you perfectly. But now let's talk about cost, because I'm sure you guys are wondering how much do 3D printed shoes cost? Realistically, they're cheaper than you probably think. The Adidas 40 Forward. I think retail is a $200 shoe. I got this on sale for 150 bucks. The Dwayne Wade Moonrock shoe, which to be fair, not comfortable, doesn't look good. This is a $60 shoe or a $70 shoe. The Nike Air Max 1000, a $180 pair of shoes, which is in line with all of Nike's other higher end sneakers. The Apthcry Mule, my shoe, 150 bucks. We wanted to make it cheaper, but that's the cheapest we could go. These prices are not crazy. They're the prices of higher end, more premium footwear, and that's because while yes, 3D printing is expensive when done individually, when you compare it to actually trying to create your own line of shoes, like for example, if I went to China and said, hey, I want to create my own pair of sneakers, I'd have to pay probably $50,000 to $100,000 up front. So the buy-in for this is incredibly expensive. Whereas if you're 3D printing a pair of shoes and you know how to model a shoe on the computer, you go to a company like Zellerfeld and say, hey, I'd like to make this shoe, but I want to test it first. And all you have to do is load your file into their computer and they'll print it for you right then and there. I mean, obviously there might have to be some tweaks to make sure that it prints in the way that works on their printer, but genuinely, like, you're spending thousands and thousands less. You might spend a couple grand just on sampling, but you're not making a new mold every single time that you do it, meaning that it's a significantly cheaper process. And if you're a smaller company like my brand Apthcry, it's so much cheaper. And you can literally print on demand. So for example, if you wanted to have a file up and have it always available, people could click buy and then a printer would start. And there you go. You don't have to buy 50,000 midsoles for shoes that you haven't sold yet. You literally make them as you sell them. So the process is just so much cheaper, so much more streamlined. And one of the biggest things, which I love that Zellerfeld does specifically, I don't know about these other brands because again, it's kind of working with other bigger brands. What Zellerfeld will do is if there's a fault in their shoes or a problem with something, they can update the 3D file, you can send your shoes back, recycle them, and then get the updated version, the V2 version. And it's just changing something in the 3D CAD. That's all it is. You don't have to recut the mold. You don't have to wait for China to ship you a new pair. You just have to wait for Zellerfeld to print you out a new one and ship it to you. So as an industrial designer who's loved 3D printing for decades and someone who loves sneakers, this is like the coolest thing that's happened to footwear, I think, ever. And you're not just limited to 3D printing in one material like in TPU or in resin or something like that. Adidas and Nike have 3D printed shoes and then added things. Like in the case of Nike, they popped in an air bubble. In the case of Adidas, they put on a tongue. Like you can add things that are not 3D printed to your shoe to make them even crazier. So there's so much potential there. In fact, you can make a traditional shoe and then 3D print parts to put on that shoe to make it even more unique. There is so much potential and I cannot wait to see what happens. Even though 3D printing has been around for decades, I think in the next 5 or 10 years, because bigger brands are working with 3D printing companies, the landscape is going to explode and 3D printed footwear will be everywhere. Maybe I'm wrong. People thought there was going to be flying cars in 2020. We didn't get that. But we do have 3D printed shoes. 3D printed shoes are releasing from big brands like Adidas and like Nike, two of the biggest footwear brands out there. So I think that this is a real thing and you should try it out. Genuinely, this Zellerfeld one in particular is one of the softest shoes I've ever worn and it's made of plastic, recyclable plastic. Now, unfortunately, the Nike pair completely sold out and it's reselling for like $1,200. So maybe this isn't the pair to get. But if you do want to try a Zellerfeld pair of sneakers, like I said, I am dropping my own pair with Zellerfeld. This is the Apthcry Mule. It releases on August 29th for a retail price of 150 bucks on apthcry.com, dropping right at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Because we're printing a bunch of them, we only have a limited number of printers, so it's going to be a relatively limited drop initially. So if you want to grab a pair of these, be on the website right at 11 a.m. Eastern time, or check them out on Zellerfeld.com at the same time. Or hey, if you're a fan of the channel and want to come say what's up, I'm actually going to be at the launch event for this shoe August 30th, the next day, at Takeout NY, a sneaker store in the Bronx. Love to see you guys there. Love to say what's up, and you can grab a pair of these for yourself or just try them on because they're mad comfy. As someone who's 3D printed shoes at home for years, I couldn't believe how soft a 3D printed shoe could be until I tried this shoe on. It genuinely feels like a foam clog. It doesn't feel like a plastic shoe. It's nuts. So if you want to try out a pair of 3D printed shoes, obviously there's a lot of choice out there, but I would suggest checking out the Apthcry Mule dropping August 29th, 11 a.m. Eastern time on apthcry.com. Sure, I'm biased because it's my own 3D printed pair of shoes, but we worked with Zellerfeld specifically because we love the brand, we love what they're doing, and we think that they're the best footwear 3D printing company out there. Check them out. Also, let me know in the comment section down below if you've tried 3D printed footwear before. What do you think? What do you like about it? What do you not like? Let me know those comments, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this and other tech-related videos. I'm hopefully going to be dropping a video on the Xbox Ally X eventually. If anyone at Asus or Xbox is watching this and wants to send me a review in it, that would be awesome because I love handheld gaming PCs. With that being said, thanks again for watching. Again, make sure to subscribe, check out the shoe, and I will see you all in the next one.